Hello. We're going to do a quick review. This week we talked about chapter 1 and 2. Chapter 1 dealt a lot with the laws as it relates to the FDA and the DEA. We said that the FDA is concerned with the general safety of the drug. It's going to be concerned with the labeling of the drug. How do you label the drug? What's on the pill? I'm sorry. As it relates to the ingredients, the active and the inactive ingredients, the warning that's there. We want to talk about the warning, everything. That's going to be a requirement of the FDA. Now, as far as the DEA is more concerned with your controlled substances. Okay, they want to talk about how you store it away, how you leaving your pad out, your prescription pad out, so nobody can write their own prescription and have access to these controlled substances. Either as it relates to locking up your controlled substances, you have to double lock it sometimes. So you want to put it in a say for instance you want to put it in a boat lock, and then you want to put that somewhere else where you can lock it so no one can get access to these controlled substances, because a controlled substance is highly abused. Okay, remember what we talked about with our schedule, our controlled substance from 1 to 5, and that's going to be our controlled substance schedule. 1 ranking the highest and 5 ranking the least abuse drug. So remember, we can recognize those drugs by seeing a C and a Roman numeral sign. So if you see C in 1, then that's going to be the highly abused controlled substance, and that's not even, we're not able to use it in the United States, so you don't have to worry about that. Like I said, that's going to be the concern of the DEA. You want to keep inventory when you're referring to the DEA with those controlled substances, even from 2 years ahead of time. The drugs that was destroyed, that was never used, whatever, they want all of that. Remember, that's the DEA, and the FDA is concerned with the general safety of the drug. So as it relates to the pills, they're going to be the people who actually approve it and remove it from the market. So the FDA will go through those processes. They're worried about the general safety of the drug, okay? And also the labeling. We talked briefly about the labeling. You can see that. The labeling. What should be there? Why should it be there? Remember your projects that you have. You should be using your Skittles. Your Skittles are your pills, and your pill bottles. You should be using those as your pill and going through your classifications, using those drugs to make a commercial, okay? Now, as far as your labeling, like we said, the 5 schedules of a controlled substance, remember that. Make sure you pay close attention to those things. And then we're going to just refer to general healthcare professional and law and ethics tips. So just making sure you keep a double lock on your controlled substance. Okay, so placing the drugs in the locked safety box, and then placing the lock box in a cupboard that is also locked. This is controlled by the DEA. They don't play, okay? Make sure you remember those things. Or make sure you remember, like I said, to keep your pads in a designated location that's out of the public area. That is one of the most common ways prescriptions are forged, and is stolen through a prescription pad. Make sure you pay careful attention to that. And you can kind of go through chapter 1 to remember some of those things that we talked about very, very briefly. Okay, so if you want to read it in depth, make sure you refer to chapter 1. Now, chapter 2 talked a little bit more about your drug names and references. We talked briefly in class about our 10 classifications. Our classifications are pretty much they're categorized by the therapeutic use, or what it is that the drug does, therapeutic use, and then we had some drug examples, okay? So there are 10. Sometimes if we say something like metformin, we should already know that we're talking about the anti-diabetic or diabetic. So if we're talking about that, we know off top is talking about reducing the blood glucose sugar level. All the times there might not be a metformin, okay? So if someone needs you to get an anti-diabetic, you need to know what medicines fall within that category or that classification. You need to know what the therapeutic use is. So we're talking about an antibiotic. We know that there's fighting off infection. So we might not always have amoxicillin. What would we use if we don't have an amoxicillin that uses the same, it's in the same classification, and it gets rid of infection, okay? So be familiar with those things. We have 10. Some of the most common ones, and they're in your textbook in chapter 2. So antibiotic, that could be one. A beta blocker. You have an antidepressant, narcotics. You have all those different things you want to look into. Familiarize yourself with those things. And then we talked about the different type of drugs, okay? The naming for the drugs. We have a generic name, and we have official, trade name, and chemical name. A generic and the official name are usually the same name, and it's the common or general name that is pretty much adopted by the United States Council. So that's going to be the generic name. If you go to Walmart and you buy detergent, you're going to get Tide or Gain, and that's going to be your generic name, okay? Whereas you just would call it detergent. That's just the regular detergent. But generic is going to be the brand name, okay? So the common or general name assigned to that drug is the general or your official name. Now, your trade name is going to be the name that's given to that particular drug by your pharmaceutical company. As a healthcare professional, you need to be familiar with these terms as well, because you're probably going to use it. This is what they're going to be using in a healthcare setting. The pharmaceutical company would name it, this particular name, and this normally your trade name. A trade name is going to be capitalized on your pill bottle, whereas a generic name will be lowercase, okay? Make sure you remember those things. And the chemical name is the exact molecule formula for the drug. We probably won't get into that much. You won't know how to pronounce it, but you will recognize it immediately when you see it, okay? So remember, the generic name is lowercase, it is never capitalized, and the trade name is capitalized. So that's how you can tell the difference with that. Also, with the sound-alike, look-alike drugs, a lot of times they're going to have a capitalized letter there, so you can recognize the difference and you'll be able to differentiate what is what. You don't want to mix those things up, okay? So remember those different names. Also, you're going to have a combination of drugs sometimes. A combination drug is going to have more than one generic drug included, and it's going to have both things there on the bottle listed. So you're going to see that it's lowercase. And you're also going to see what milligram it is. It'll tell you the difference. For example, our book tells us about Tylenol. Our Tylenol is sometimes number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it's just about the different doses, just the only difference. So it'll have a number 1, 2, 3, or 4 just to be able to differentiate what milligram is in what particular generic drug. So you want to pay close attention to that. Here I'm going to show you briefly if you can see that. This is the generic, the chemical name, and the trade name. The trade name is cut off just a little bit. Okay? So you want to make sure you remember those things. Over the counter does not require a prescription. Now, if you see RX on something, that means it requires a prescription. Pharmacy only, okay? Now, legend drugs. Legend drugs is something that can cause harmful side effects. So you want to be very, very careful. And it is a prescription drug. So it can be something like your birth control, something like an antibiotic, or something that can play around with your hormones. That's going to be your legend drugs. And a controlled substance is a controlled drug controlled by prescription requirements because of the danger of addiction or abuse. And that's your Percocet. That's your hydrocodone. I'm sorry, not hydrocodone. Just all those type of things. And remember, those are going to be scaled from C1 all the way to C5. And that's in Roman numeral. You will be able to tell those, whatever schedule that's on. We also talked about the contradictions as well as the side effects. The contradictions is a list of conditions for which the drug should not be given. For example, a contradiction for Benadryl is breastfeeding and hypersensitivity. So you want to remember those things when taking Benadryl. Now, a side effect or an adverse reaction is a list of possible unpleasant or dangerous secondary effects other than the desired effect. So that is the difference. The side effects is something that might happen while taking the drug. It's probably unpleasant. We don't want it to come, but there is a possibility that it'll happen. Whereas the contradiction, we shouldn't take this drug at all. Like if we're drinking alcohol, then the drug shouldn't be taken together because it won't work. or if you might be allergic or something like that. Those are the things that will fall under that particular condition. Now, remember, we did talk about a few websites that are present under Chapter 2, and it'll kind of tell you about where to find information about it, whether it's just looking it up, knowing the side effects of it, knowing what it might cause, things of that nature. You want to make sure you're very familiar with that, okay? So if you have any questions, make sure you bring them, make sure you read, make sure you review. So the most common things that we discuss is FDA, DEA. We talked about the classifications of the medicine, the therapeutic use. So that's going to be how it's divided by classification. We also kind of got into what controlled substances are, and how it relates to what we're talking about here with the DEA, how they require us to store it away, how they want us to keep our prescription pads locked up or moved in a particular place, so we won't have anyone forge our a prescription or our signature, for that matter, on the drug. A lot of times we already have our number on there, and they will go ahead and fill their prescription out and give it, and it's abused. So you want to keep very be aware of what you're doing with those things. So just be cautious, read. Let's get familiar, because next week we're going to talk about the sources and the bodily effects of drugs. Also the medication preparation and supplies. Thank you.